9% of the group thought that they didn't think it was within their board's purview to care about their health. You are an investment of the board, right? Sitting in the CEO role. The organization should absolutely care about your mental and physical health, because if you can't operate at 100% regularly, heck, even 90% some of the time, you are doing a disservice to the organization. So your board should absolutely be caring about your mental and physical health.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with the absolute best crop of CEOs ever, Lindsay Currie, Adam Levy, Tara Puckey. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi, Joanna.
Hey, so let's start with some introductions. Why don't you all introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good day, wherever you are, whenever you are listening. My name is Lindsay Currie. I'm the Executive Officer at the Council on Undergraduate Research. I've been the Executive Officer there just shy of 6 years. We are an association serving the higher education space with 7.5 full-time staff positions.
My name is Adam Levy. I'm the Executive Director at the American Craniofacial Association. I've been here for just under 5 years, based in Chapel Hill, a remote organization. And we have a staff of 6 plus many outsourced/extended partners who really make our engine work the way it does.
My name's Tara Puckey. I'm the Executive Director at the Radio, Television, Digital News Association. Our members are news directors, producers, reporters in both local and network newsrooms at the television, radio, and digital newsroom spaces. I have been with the organization for about 8 years and was with another journalism organization prior to that. We are a team of 8, and like Adam and Lindsay, support our small staff team with some really great external partners, because that's what makes the small staff orgs function and flow. So excited to be here.
I also want to shout out to Silvia Quevedo from Lamaze International. She was supposed to be part of this conversation, but had something unexpected come up. So Silvia, we're missing you.
Shout out, Silvia.
So last year, the 4 of you put out a survey that you sent out to chief staff executives of associations, and you asked about their mental and physical health. So what's the origin of this survey?
This project came about after a few of us started talking about where we were in life as chief staff executives of associations. And we all represent small staff organizations, or in Sylvia's case, she's an AMC, but certainly runs a smaller organization with comparable limited resources. And I think we all aligned in this concept of having pain points along the road, serving in this seat, and really wanting to know how each other was doing, and sort of eventually leading into the fact that this conversation felt like it needed to be had at a larger scale.
Why did you think that? Why did you think that somehow a survey needed to be done?
So I think what we all realized is, conversations about how we were feeling, how we were doing, how we were taking care of ourselves were very different when they were had in private with peers that we are close to than the conversations that were being had in public. And so publicly, whether it's like ASE annual or in committee or council meetings, everything is fine. Our association work might be challenging, but we love being a CEO. We love the work we do. We love sitting in his chair. We love helping our staff thrive. All of those things can be true. And yet, in private, when a lot of us are having these conversations, everything is not quite as shiny as it is sometimes portrayed to be. And so what we realize is in part of these kind of conversations that we're having in hushed whispers is that we're not doing a good job taking care of ourselves, both mentally and physically. And this job is lonely and it can cause us to feel not okay some of the time or a lot of the time. And so we realized that, it was really important for us to figure out how pervasive this might be so that we can start thinking about, is this just something that exists beyond the anecdotal that we all feel and think about? And what does it look like and how bad is it? And then what could we do about it?
One thing I would add, right, is why did we do a survey in this seat? We know often when we're trying to make decisions, justify resources and decisions, that data is essential. Our boards are asking for it. It's how we make budgetary decisions. It's how we move forward with strategy. And so if we were going to try and convince some change in the industry, we knew it needed to be more than just the three of us sitting on a call and knocking on ASAE's door or our colleagues and saying like, hey, I've been sick for a while. I think this other guy is sick. We need to change the industry, right? Having this data could be a really powerful tool for aiding in this conversation. And I think that's kind of where we came from and why we were really considering what this looks like. And I think it started with mental health, right? Because it was such a critical topic at the time. And through our conversations, recognized, gosh, like our physical health isn't all that great either. And so is it just us? How do we verify this? And getting some hard evidence beyond ourselves to be able to influence kind of our further pushing of this conversation into the public light.
Wow. So that's really interesting. In private conversations, you started noticing a trend and then wondered, are there other people feeling the same way? And how pervasive is this challenge or this situation where chief staff executives are feeling overwhelmed and not in a good spot? So how did you develop the questions and what kind of questions did you ask?
So when we began to develop the questions, I think first and foremost, we wanted to consider direct impacts that we have seen individually in terms of those mental and physical aspects of this job. So were we making time to get to appointments? Were we feeling depressed? Were we happy? Was our physical health failing us in certain ways? Had we thought about certain elements of our physical health or mental health but hadn't taken action? What are certain ailments that we've had that we could potentially correlate directly to the stress of the job or the time of the job or the support of our boards or what it's like to manage a staff and what impact that has on us? And I think as we thought through all these and with all that context in mind, the questions sort of started to come up naturally or organically. A question such as, has your job had an impact on any of the following? And then we might come up with what those impacts might be. And I think between 4 CSEs, we were able to come up with, dare I say, sadly, what some of those impacts could be because we have had those happen to us.
We really wanted to make sure that we were focusing the questions as they related to working as a CSE or a CEO. And so what were the job environments, not just our environments as humans impacting the things. So even our questions about physical and mental health were with the caveat of being impacted by your job, right? And so we really wanted to make sure in a post-COVID world, in a really hectic, turbulent 20s time, that we weren't just asking these questions and not being able to connect the job as the prompt for some of the impact. Yes, we recognize the greater world in our experience, and it is impacting us all as humans, but anything job specific, because that I thought we would be able to best be able to identify and respond to. The world at large, currently we're all trying to survive it and make changes, certainly, but what can we do within our roles? What can we do as association professionals to try and change these jobs to be healthier environments for those that are sitting in those seats?
So how many chief staff execs ended up filling out the survey? What kind of responses did you get?
So we had about 175 people participate in the survey, and then about 150 completed the entire thing. So while we know there are still lots who didn't participate, I think even with the small number that we did have, those statistics for how people are feeling and taking care of themselves are meaningful. And honestly, if we're looking at a smaller group, I would have hoped they would have been smaller. And so you can only think about the scale of what this could be if we were looking at it in a larger group.
Well, let's dive into the results. At a high level, what did you find?
We have reported on some of the data so far. We were able to publish an article through ASAE or Associations Now on some of that. And I would say that we focused more on some of the scary or more worthy data to report on. I think that includes 85% of those who responded said that their personal health and well-being had been negatively impacted by their role. So again, just to repeat that, that's 85% of the, as Tara said, 150 chief executives who responded. And then 60% of respondents said they struggled with sleep or used sleep medication. And 89 of 147 respondents to this question said that at some point their professional performance had suffered due to deprioritizing their mental or physical health. So those just a couple quick items from the survey, but there was much more data as well.
Oh my God, alarming stats.
Those caught our attention. We've been out touting those to try and get attention to the survey. But sometimes, even as I continue to look at this data, it is some of even the smaller percentages that are still incredibly concerning, right? We had 7% of those that participated in the survey indicate that they wanted to consider seeing a therapist or a mental health professional, but were ashamed about it. So 7% doesn't sound like a lot, but you don't want even 20 people thinking that they shouldn't be able to get the support they need or recognize that that is critical to being successful in this job. 9% of the group thought that they didn't think it was within their board's purview to care about their health. You are an investment of the board, right? Sitting in the CEO role. The organization should absolutely care about your mental and physical health, because if you can't operate at 100% regularly, heck, even 90% some of the time, you are doing a disservice to the organization. So your board should absolutely be caring about your mental and physical health. It does not mean they should be asking if you've been to the dentist in the last year. That is certainly crossing the line, but having an understanding and certainly caring about you as an individual and as a human is going to be critical to the success of these jobs moving forward.
Yeah, I think not even looking at things as serious as suicide, 24% indicated depression as a result of their work. And then you think about things like high blood pressure, weight gain, headaches. We don't consider those detrimental day to day. But if you think about the long-term cost, not only to you, but to the association that you're serving, if you have daily headaches, if you don't take care of high blood pressure, if your weight is fluctuating in so many different ways, and if you're struggling with depression, there is a cost to the association. And so back, I think, just to underscore a little bit to what Lindsay said, which is we as CSEs do, I think, a better job than we did had you asked us 20 years ago of taking care of our staff's mental health and making sure that they take care of themselves. That is something we do for our teams. The people who are responsible for making sure that we do that for ourselves is our supervisors, and our supervisors are the board. And at the end of the day, there is a business case for it. We are an investment, and there is a cost to the association if we are not taking care of ourselves physically and mentally.
I think that's a fantastic point. And I don't think we only want to consider that economic impact, but I do think it's incredibly relevant. I mean, it's certainly something we all think about when we do our jobs and something our boards consider. I think it was something like 13 million jobs, or about 10% of all private sector jobs, are in nonprofit. And I believe ASAE usually uses the number of 50,000 association executives who are part of ASAE. So we're talking about tens of thousands, if not millions, of people who are impacted by how their organization is run. And the role of the CSE is a weird role, because whether it's a group of 6 employees or 7 or 8, like some of us, or you're the CEO of a 501c6 with 300 employees and a $100 million budget, there's still only one. And it really does show the impact that this position can have on many, and that sort of trickle-down effect. I also realize that in my smaller organization, I can have a direct impact on those who report to me or who have others reporting to them, because I can have those direct conversations. in a much larger organization, I think the same thing can be true, but it has to come from the top still in terms of maybe talking to vice presidents or directors or senior directors and having those conversations in the first place, and that being a part of the CSE job and the conversation we have in seeking this job and maintaining this job and creating the next version of leaders for this job will impact those senior staff leaders who impact more junior staff. And I think that trickle down effect is very real. I was on a call with a young professional who I'm mentoring, and we sort of joked about the 2 a.m. email conundrum of, look, I'm showing my superiors that I'm emailing at 2 a.m. And I said to her, don't do that to yourself.
Just stop, right?
Just stop. I remember doing that. And I wish somebody would have looked at me and said, no one cares. If anything, they think, why are you emailing at 2 a.m? But if I think about that concept of mental health and this person who's stressed and she made a mistake here, and so it really stressed her out there, no one in her organization was having that same conversation with her. And I think part of this is, and maybe it's long-winded or aspirational or whatever you want to call it, is like eventually it will start to have an impact on that trickle-down effect of more people talking about it and taking care of each other in this very service-oriented industry that we work in.
Adam, that's such a good point. And first of all, I love that you said that to her. And I think that that is part of this too, right? Which is that what got us to this survey is that we all have what we consider trusted, tight-knit groups of peers who are CSEs who we're able to have those conversations with about how we're feeling and how we're doing. And I think as we look at kind of the trend line in terms of how many new CSEs are moving into their roles post-COVID, a wave of retirement, the changing industry, all of those new CEOs may not have the same networks. And so I think for us, it's really important to make sure that this work and this conversation makes its way into the broader association community, because there's a whole new crop of people who don't have networks and people to tell them that emailing at 2 a.m. is going to be horrible for them mentally in the long run, for what it does to their board culture, for all the things, right? And so I think that is such an important part of this, which is that by having the conversation in the open and showing that it's a problem, we open ourselves up to be some of those peer connections, to have those conversations, but also bring it into the light a little bit more.
Tara, I so appreciate you bringing that up, because one of the prompts for me to want to get engaged in this work was in the first 2 years of being an executive, I got physically very ill. I came on 6 months before COVID to an organization that had never had an association professional running the show. There was lots of work that needed to be done. COVID hit. We went completely virtual. We're changing all of our programs and services, just like all CSEs at the time were doing. And yet I did not have the tight network I do now at that point in time to call me out and say, stop working. You can't solve it all in one day. That couldn't help provide guidance and resources and shared knowledge to help make it easier for me. And I was really lucky. I did have a mentor that said, hey, you need to take a break. It's not going to be sustainable for you, for your organization. You are actually doing your organization and yourself a disservice. Take a break, get yourself recalibrated. And I did do that. And I am very lucky at this point in my career where at a moment's notice, I can text a dozen CEOs to try and get some feedback. And that has changed certainly how I view this job, how I execute in this role, how I am mentoring other people. And Adam mentioned the person he was mentoring this week. We all do that service. So I want to make sure we are perpetuating really healthy mindsets for taking on this job that are sustainable, that are going to help them enjoy it. But that network is so critical in the beginning. And I think that's a place where I hope this research spurs more support for the creation of those networks and for the infrastructure to be created. So new CEOs don't get into this position and flounder and think they're not capable, because talk about imposter syndrome, because you are putting on that perfected forward-facing thing, and that the rest of us aren't also faking it till we make it some days, struggling through these decisions that we're just not showing publicly. So we can have some more of those authentic conversations. So this can be an even better job moving forward.
First, I just want to say, I consider how people get this job. Some people get it by they come from a different organization and they take over a new job. And even in that concept alone, it proves how weird this industry is. Like, I run an organization of the most amazing humans on earth who take care of children with cleft and craniofacial conditions and their families. I mean, I knew nothing about this industry. I worked in emergency medicine prior to that for almost 8 years. And so I consider myself sort of a healthcare person, a healthcare executive. But I didn't work at, let's say, Chase Bank as the senior vice president of branch operations for 12 years, who got promoted to take over as COO and eventually groomed to be CEO under Jamie. Like, I'm just making up some crazy example, but that happens sometimes in associations, I think, where somebody works there for a while and they eventually step up, but it's not always a given. And again, this isn't an industry or a profession that is one industry. It's made up of so many. So even in that capacity, it's so unique to expect people to step in and know what they're doing and feel good about it. And it's equally sort of a farce to assume that just because an executive director or CEO is somewhere for, let's say, 10 years and their VP of whatever is going to step up and take over when they retire means that they will find success. Because again, not everyone is meant to be a CEO or a good leader in terms of what that means to them. But I think maybe what just got me fired up the most is the concept of change. And associations, they're kind of like an antiquated industry. I started at Smith Buckland, and you got meeting planners who have been in their job for 45 years and they refuse to move their specs from like a Word document to an Excel file. Like, this profession, whether it's resistant or it's just something that people care so much about or whatever it is, people don't always change it easily. And that includes CEOs who refuse to leave their job or CEOs who do not prepare the next person to take their job. And I do think that all of this falls back into this concept of creating a different approach to the pipeline of getting the CSE role and having that be a role that is set up for success, because there is a structure that lives within that entire process at more than just Lindsay picking up the phone and calling 10 of her friends, as opposed to having boards who are well trained and the infrastructure of ASAE and search firms and consultants and executive coaches, all being more aligned on this concept overall, which as it stands right now, does not really exist.
Well, okay, but I got a question for you guys. So Lindsay, you talked about how when you first became a chief staff exec, you didn't have the CEO network that you have now, and you didn't have the practices of self-care. So here's my question. How does one develop those? Where do you get it? So I'll give you an example. I'm someone who's a night owl, and I would email my staff, this is a decade ago, at like 11 p.m. And I would always say, don't respond. But they still felt pressure. And so then I think I attended some presentation where somebody said, schedule your emails. Like, you might be thinking about this stuff because you had a brainwave at 11 p.m., but schedule it to, land in people's inboxes at 8 a.m. if you really don't want a response. And I thought, oh, what a great idea. So like one little example of something. And so now my team laughs. They're like, yeah, when stuff starts landing at 8:30 or 8 a.m., we know it was from last night. So now I like schedule it for 1 p.m., 9:30 or whatever, so that they don't know. But I had to learn that the hard way. And I sort of had to also develop my network. How do you learn these practices that allow you to take care of your mental and physical health and also nurture the mental and physical health of your staff? Like, where are we teaching this stuff? Because you go to ASAE and they teach you how to run the association, but they don't teach you how to make sure you don't burn out, for example.
I think some of it is cultural of the generation that the three of us happen to represent. And I think conversations that we have had amongst this group, but Adam just talked about wanting to change the industry. We love the industry. We see the importance of community. We see the power associations can have. And yet we recognize we need to do it different for the future, both for ourselves as employees, but for the communities we serve. And that means rattling everything to make change, right? I don't want to work in a miserable place. I want to love my colleagues. I want to have fun doing this work because it's hard, but how do you have a good time? But I also really want to care about my family and spend time with them. I want to care about my community and spend time with them. And if this job becomes all consuming, you can't do that. And I think one of the data points you see in the survey is still the huge disparity between the female experience and the male experience in these roles. And it is still significantly harder and a more negative experience for women. They are taking less good care of their mental and physical health. They have less time, all of these pieces, which we know are obstacles for women in the workforce. That does not mean I have any interest in sitting at home. I'm not willing to do that. That's not what I want. But I also want to see my kid. And so how do we balance those things? And so for me, part of this, I think, really amazing group of people, which includes the other CEOs that are in this group, of why I found them, is it became less competitive between us and in our generation. We didn't see ourselves as competitors of associations. We saw ourselves as champions of each other and making the association profession better. And so for me, shout out to another CEO rock star, Christina Llewellyn. We were sitting down one time and she was talking about going to a 4-day work week and having an email-less culture. Now, the email-less culture wasn't the right fit for me, but it challenged me to think about how I was supporting my team with communications. How was I thinking about how we were going to execute as an organization? And so we made changes. We went to rolling summer Fridays. We went to a different vacation package because we see ourselves as actually, how do we use ourselves to challenge each other to keep making better associations versus challenging each other because we see each other as competition for the next position. We just want to make the whole profession better because we see that as a benefit to ourselves and each other than thinking about, oh, well, I saw Adam post at midnight, so I've got to post on LinkedIn at midnight too, right? It's like, oh no, like Adam's doing a really cool thing. I want to call him and learn about it. And we really, I think, do a great job of sharing those stories. This morning, I know a CEO I've been talking about that is having a pain point with her board. And I saw an article and I just sent it over like, hey, you might want to use this as fodder with your board to make a change, right? Because we can't all see everything and do everything. How do you help support all of our work? That is really hard as you move forward.
So Tara and Adam, it sounds like Lindsay has kind of developed some of these practices. What are you guys doing to protect your own physical and mental health and that of your staff? So share some ideas.
Well, I was going to say, Adam, if you're posting stuff at midnight, I won't call you and ask how cool it is because I'm sleeping. So
That was an example. I'm not actually doing that. I'm sleeping too.
here's the thing, and I think Lindsay is right. I think there is a generational shift in terms of how we approach being an association executive. I think the part of that is woven into all the things that she said is that I think you have a new group of CEOs and CSEs who are perfectly content sharing the things they've tried and the things that didn't work and seeing failure as an opportunity. So I think to Lindsay's point about email-less culture and changing vacation structure and all of those things, I think so many of us now are saying like, we're going to eliminate that won't work for us from our vocabulary and try things. But I think that's also part of the frustration that some of us feel, which is that in the association community, we talk a lot about the tangible, tactical skills of running an association, right? Like, how do you market your conference better? How do you fundraise differently? Like a best fundraising, like stuff like that. And I don't think we do a good job talking about the culture in which we create as CSEs and for our teams and what that means, because it directly impacts the mental health of our staffs and it directly impacts the mental health of CSEs. And we don't talk about that enough. And so I think that goes right along with the fact that we should be talking about this more broadly because it's not, frankly, as sexy as, hey, here's the best marketing pitch of 2025, which I would argue is the same marketing pitch we've had for decades. But that's neither here nor there. And I'll get off my soapbox now. The one thing I think I will highlight is the fact that, like, I do think there are conversations happening about ways that CSEs are creatively supporting their teams, probably less themselves. So I don't want to take the focus off that because I think we're making some progress in that way. But it continues to amaze me that it is such a core part of what makes associations successful that we don't talk about it enough.
I love that you were talking about like, we keep cycling the same topics at conferences, like how do you recruit members? How do you fundraise better? And I think we don't ever talk about why they're not working. A tired person pitching the best fundraising marketing call, whatever it is isn't going to be successful. And so to me, everything is grounded in culture, right? You can't talk about onboarding in a silo. You can't talk about marketing in a silo until we talk about the culture across associations and supporting the people. None of it is going to be successful. Sure, you might be able to eke out 10 more members if you push people's nose to the stone, but overall, the sustainability of the organization and the people in it and their long-term success, I think comes back to these cultural things that we're talking about. So like the mental and physical health comes back to the culture of these associations. And it's not always about whether you send emails or not, but the intentionality of caring for the people that work there and do these jobs.
So I think that both of you are on to maybe the strongest argument of the why in terms of focusing on CSE health. And this whole idea and focus didn't come because we were talking about the staffs that we care for or necessarily the front and center. Like we wanted to understand how people were doing and what was the challenge and what could we share that would be that impact. But I really do think in terms of where this conversation is at the moment, culture. I mean, where I'm going, Lindsay, is what you just said, and Sarah, that you were alluding to is I think that having a culture that allows us to admit that we're not robots is very, very important, especially though in service-driven organizations and industries. And we all work at nonprofits. There are nonprofits by tax code that, of course, are not necessarily as service-oriented. But if you think about what all three of us do, at least in Sylvia too, our members are improving the world. That's why we have that tax status. And therefore, I believe that most people who stay in nonprofit, most employees or teams, people who have been in it for a long time, it's because they found their niche. Like they wanted to stick with it. They've worked at this organization for 10 years or 15 years, or they bounced around from associations because there is a culture that fits a certain type of person, just like a sales culture or a cutthroat culture or a tech culture fits better for other folks. And our culture, which is what we are concerned with in our industry, I think that we have to identify the fact that it is not a place where people will go on to make tens of millions of dollars. It is not a place where working until 10 or 11 will yield you overtime pay that gets you promoted 20 times over and all of a sudden you're at the top of your game because there's so many more opportunities. It is a unique industry. And so I think culturally, and I would agree with Tara and Lindsay, that generationally, whether we offer generational labels or not, my view on how I manage my staff is very much how I want to manage myself. I want to be well. I want to identify when I'm not feeling good. I want to step aside and say, my daughter is having behavioral issues at school because of anxiety, and I'm going to take a day off to make sure that I am taking her to occupational therapy so she can get the help she needs. And I want to tell the staff that so they know I'm taking care of my family and they should take care of theirs. But I don't think everyone does that. I don't think everyone feels comfortable, and it's not our job to tell them they should feel comfortable. But I do think, and again, with what Lindsay and Tara just said, having that be the new norm for people who have the sort of quote unquote power that we have is something that will change the lives of many other people. But it has to start with us in this role as Chief Staff Executive, because if we don't start to have that conversation, it's certainly not going to be our staffs or our boards necessarily who begin to have it either. So the reach of all of this, I think, at the ultimate level is to have more impact than it does now.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you want other chief staff execs to kind of know you're not alone if you're feeling some of this. And as the chief staff exec, there are things that you can and should be doing to really take care of yourself and your staff. But if you can control kind of what the environment is for your staff, you also have bosses, and your bosses are boards. So what's the answer? Like, what should boards know about what it's like to be a chief staff exec right now so that you might create a more friendly environment for your staff, but it's not a friendly environment for you? I think one of you said, like, but who's watching out for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question and another dynamic of all of this. And I'm just going to be very brief in my response, which is something that I learned very early on is that I wish more association professionals who are interested in this job had the advice given to them first that they should not seek the job title, but they should seek the association. Because if you find a fit that is not a good fit or not a culture that you can change from the board as well as the staff, you will end up suffering. I hear it all the time. I'm sure Lindsay and Tara may know colleagues as well, but it does not matter how good you are at your job if you cannot find a fit for who you are as a chief staff executive. In my case, I made sure that the values of the board matched my own values to some degree. And I've worked in the last several years to ensure that the values and the culture of our organization start at the board level. Therefore, what I'm doing is not fighting against the board to implement a culture and a value system with the staff that doesn't mesh organization wide. And I think that is our job as chief staff executives, because our boards are all volunteer boards made up of professionals who know absolutely nothing, or at least limited amounts, of what it takes to run an association.
It may not happen overnight. On day one, your board may not be your biggest cheerleader because they don't know. They are often representing industries that have nothing to do with associations. They don't know what our role is. And so part of our job is to educate them and to train them. And so what training are you providing to your board? What external voices are you bringing in? Because I do recognize sometimes it is really tricky for us to come in and you don't just want to go to your board and be like, hey, I'm working really hard here. Could you pay attention to me? But one of the things that my organization did is we brought in a culture consultant for the board, and they've been coaching the board for the last 2 years. And it became a more enjoyable place even for them. They wanted this to be a good use of their time. They wanted it to be a healthy environment and a place where they enjoyed coming and giving back. And so how are you investing? Again, it goes back to culture. Culture isn't just something for the staff. Culture isn't just something for the board. Like, how are you looking at all of these different microcosms within your organization and supporting it and cultivating it? So we have this culture consultant that's working with the board. We make sure our president, and we've actually expanded the number this year that go either to CEO symposium or exceptional boards to get outside perspective. Where are you bringing in guest speakers to your board to help them understand the industry that we are working in? So we happen to work with Conference Direct, and they come into our board to talk about the realities of the events industry so that they are hearing from multiple voices what we are dealing with on a given day. How is the environment changing? And providing that perspective for them, because we can't assume that they're going to know it on their own. They're also not just going to pick up an article and read it. So like, how do we help them get there? So I think that is part of our job, is to help ensure that they're supporting us. And it's through some of these changing cultures and training them that helps us do that. And so on day one, what my board looked like and what it looks like now is very different. But I just renegotiated my third contract, and my board approved a sabbatical for me.
Wow.
They understand this is an incredibly stressful job, and that I thrive when I have time to go off and think and strategize. And it is different than vacation time. It is a benefit to the organization. The vacation time is a benefit to me and my family, but the sabbatical time allows me to go off and think about, how am I going to strategize for this board? What education do I need and other things that I need to pick up? It goes beyond professional development, and they supported that addition to my contract. And so where are you working with your board to help them know who you are, how you thrive, and what supports you need? And unless you're willing to tell them that, you can't assume they know how to support you. So you have to train them to support you as well.
Lindsay, I just wanted to say what makes me sad is that there are so many folks who don't know to advocate for themselves in that way, or say to themselves, gee, I wish there were other CEOs out there who I could talk to about what they're doing, because, it just feels like I'm stuck, and, like, I guess this is the job I got. I'm supposed to be working 15 hours a day, and it is what it is. So it's so amazing to hear this. And even if you think about big organizations who have tens of millions of dollars of budget, their CEO, CSE may be taken care of in a different way, whether that's sabbatical or a bonus structure or private doctors or whatever it might be. So one way or the other, the equity piece of all this, just because you have the title of CSE, CEO, executive director, does not mean you have the same experience as people across the board.
I think there's two pieces here, and I want to make sure we don't forget the second one, which is like, yes, we absolutely need to work to do all of the things that you both mentioned in terms of like creating that culture within our organizations. I think one of the things that the three of us and Sylvia agree on and really want to focus on in moving this work forward is that I think there's a bigger role for the association community to play in making sure that we address this in a more broad way. So we want to make sure that recruiters are educating new CSEs about how to advocate for yourself, like Lindsay explained. We want to make sure that this conversation is taking place in larger forums like ASAE Annual. We want to make sure that it's no longer a conversation that takes place in quiet hallways. And we want to make sure that the education that's being provided at places where your CSE and your board chair come together and where folks are learning about getting their CAE, that this is an important component of all of those resources. Because while I think the four of us are super committed to having conversations with other new execs to make sure they know, we're not going to reach them all. There's far too many, and we are still supposed to be taking care of ourselves. But I think for us, the goal really is to make sure that this becomes part of a broader conversation and a broader educational opportunity to make sure that we try to shift the industry in recognizing that it's really important. It's important for the associations that have CSEs doing the good work and leading good teams. And it's important for the humans that sit in those chairs because the work we do is important. The people we are is really important. And that has to be a bigger job than just one we take on ourselves or one this very small but mighty group takes on.
So what I'm hearing is that boards, recruiters need to understand the environment so that they can support a good environment. And wouldn't it be amazing if every recruiter said, look, for every 3 years, you need to give the chief staff exec, 1 month sabbatical. And if everyone just did that.
Joanna, it's even more than that. Like telling the boards they need to find out what that executive needs to thrive. Not everybody needs a sabbatical.
Yeah, absolutely. Just have conversations. So have them feel like it's part of our jobs.
That's right.
Yeah. Huh. Because who educates the boards? That's the recruiters. It's other board members. It's the outgoing chair. Maybe some of them get educated by ASAE, but a lot of them don't. So I was just going to say, it sounds like it could be tricky for you as a chief staff exec to maybe even give them the survey because now they're panic stricken. Potentially like, oh my God, is the person running my association like feeling suicidal? And then you don't want them thinking I have to protect the organization. I should push this person out because that's clearly not the answer. The answer is how do we create an environment where people are thriving?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And there aren't that many entities who can do that in terms of who interacts with people in that position. In other words, the recruiting firm, the staffing, the people doing the interviews with potential new CSE, to some degree, hold a lot of power in the conversation that we're talking about. And so if you remove them, literally, if you just say, they find somebody, they interview with a panel of, from the organization of the nominating or interview committee or whatever it is, that person's hired, and then that recruiting firm steps out. Well, that was the only sort of intervention to potentially say or do something. And at that point, that CSE is like, it's go time. They step in that role. It's their first 90 days. So how many chances do we have to really change this dynamic? There aren't that many. And thus, I guess, just to come full circle for a moment, this survey and this conversation is why all of this came to fruition. Like we weren't even really considering these implications, at least within our small group beforehand. We've heard really good positive feedback from those who have heard what we have to say or heard the survey results or seen the article. So it seems like many people are in agreement. The question now is, what interventions are there in our limited capacity to make that change for those who want it?
I want to go back to the survey and I want to talk to the environment that we're operating in today, because you did the survey last year and it feels like a million years ago. We're a few months into this new administration. What's the environment like today for a chief staff exec and how has it changed since last summer?
Broadly, I think regardless of where your opinions, beliefs, thoughts fall, this is a time of exceptional uncertainty. Every single day, something is different, and every single day, something that could directly or indirectly impact associations is happening. And so I think it is a time where there's a bit of whiplash in terms of where we should be focusing our attention from a chief staff executive perspective. You have funding challenges that are popping up. You have membership challenges. You have challenges facing the industries that you serve. And it doesn't matter what the industry is. I think everyone is being impacted in some way in terms of what that looks like. And so not only are you struggling with the things we've always struggled with as CSEs, membership, fundraising, all of those things, but then you add on a layer of trying to make sure your staff feels supported at a time that feels very chaotic for lots of people personally, maybe even you personally. So you have that additional layer. And then I think there are so many changes in being able to formulate a plan for your association and your staff and what comes next that it just feels like very turbulent times and very emotional times. And I think it makes everything that much harder to be a good support system to those in your orbit, staff, family, members. And then, of course, last but definitely not least, which is why we're here, ourselves.
Well, the reason I'm asking is, in the survey, one of the results was 41% said their physical health activity was a lower priority than professional priorities. When we have organizations, my clients included, facing existential crises, right? Are we going to be around? Is our conference going to be around? Like what's happening to our members in our communities? I got to believe that this is an even worse environment and that somehow physical and mental health take a backseat again to maybe the existential crises affecting these organizations. So how are you coping?
Joanna, one of the first things, and I talk about this with a lot of folks that I mentor, is have you done the work to recognize what self-care looks like to you? Because as I said about the sabbatical, that is not the right self-care for everyone. Some people need to go and get a pedicure and a massage. That is not the self-care I need. But if you haven't done that personal work to recognize what you need, what are your safeguards, how are you looking out for yourself, you can't do that work. So actually, in the last year, I've probably worked out more than ever before because I know I need that time to clear my brain, to be able to get some of that angst out and to focus. I also maybe have way too many snacks on my desk. It is a balance. But what do you need to do that to sustain yourself? Like one of the best things for me is I have a group chat with a bunch of other executives and we're checking in on each other and telling each other about our lives and sharing about our dogs or whatever we need to do. That is actually more fulfilling and grounding to me. Like I have found the self-care I need is grounding, that there are still good people, that our work is still important, that I can still give back to my community in ways that make an impact. Like that has been self-care for me. And so recognizing what your need is for self-care, it might not just be taking a vacation alone. For some people, it might, right? But you might find out like that actually made you more miserable. Like, what is the piece that you need? And so, like, spending 30 minutes, spending an hour, spending a few days thinking about that, like, that should be your first step right now.
I just want to say that destigmatizing anything around taking care of oneself should probably be the ultimate goal, too. Just thinking about what you said, Lindsay, like, how many people might you say, are you taking care of yourself? And they're like, oh, I don't need to take care of myself. I mean, I think there's a degree of resistance to self-care. It's weird. I don't know why it still exists. I do think it exists for men and women, but that kind of machismo attitude of like, I can do this, that's why I got this job, kind of overtakes the vulnerability that it takes to be like, no, I do need to go reach out to that friend group or the 30 minutes or the vacation by myself, like you just said, Lindsay. So taking that first step is still really hard for some people.
Tara, what are you doing?
Probably not as good of a job as I could, right? Like, I think that's the thing is part of where this comes from is recognizing that, like, while we're talking about it and we're focusing on it, it doesn't mean that any of us do it perfectly either. I did try to vacation by myself a couple weeks ago and I hated it. So learned that one's not for me. Apparently, I need some social aspect in my self-care, but I think it's a work in progress. I think we're all a work in progress. And being able to say, like, I got it wrong. I made a mistake. I didn't focus. I let this go too far or too long. Being able to say that, being able to say it out loud opens up the door for so many other people to recognize those things about themselves. And to Adam's point, destigmatizing that I need to step away. I need to take a minute. I need to pause. One of my favorite things we do as a staff is at the end of our staff stand-ups, we do red light, yellow light, green light. You just say what color your traffic light is, and offer no context. You don't have to say your light is red because, you got a flat tire on your way to work and whatever. But if your light is red, it's red. And then the rest of the team knows to be able to say, is there anything I can do to support you? Do you want to talk about it? If there's anything I can take off your plate so you can just go take the day, let us know. And I think it's a really non-pressurized way to just be able to share with people in your sphere, hey, here's how I'm doing this week. And people will show up, I think, a lot more than we expect them to. But we have to open the door and allow those conversations to happen and show some sort of vulnerability from the get from leadership perspectives.
I do think vulnerability, maybe that's the most powerful tool out of all of this, especially when you have the ability to say to people who think you're a smart, impactful person. And I say that because I still to this day don't know why anybody gave me this job. I tell people all the time, I go to therapy. I love therapy. I run a lot. I have a glass of wine here and there. I try to balance that. There's just a lot of things that I do that I'm okay talking about out loud. And I just think that the more you can reduce stigma around things, I think it's true in healthcare a lot. I think as people have challenges, fertility is something that for me and my wife, we had challenges with. Ever we've talked about that out loud with people who have had similar challenges, they're like, oh my God, you're the first person I've ever heard talk about this, not in private. It's like destigmatizing these things that really make sense because so many people go through them. Or if somebody has substance abuse issues and they hear from somebody else, there's a reason why there are recovery programs. These are all concepts that have existed for a long time. I just think that if you can bring them out in the open, it's so much easier for other people to come out of sort of hiding and feel part of that. So I think, Tara, hearing you say that word vulnerability is really crucial. I wish it was something that was talked about more.
Well, we can certainly model it, right? I know on Wednesday, I was having a week. I slacked my staff and I said, you are not going to see me till 10 because if I don't get a workout in, I'm going to collapse.
There you go. Perfect.
And they said, no problem. We'll see you at 10, or whenever. And I'll tell you, when I was in California, my staff knew that I was dealing with some mom issues and all that stuff. And when I came back, I talked about it and somebody said, do you think I can talk to you about it offline because I'm having similar issues? So I think you're absolutely right that just destigmatizing it, talking about it, opens the door for other people to talk about it and feel like, wow, someone else is experiencing this. So what's next for the survey? Is there a next for the survey or the conversation?
I think we've been having that conversation, and I don't know that we're 100% settled. What I will say, I think we all agree on is that piece of what we talked about, which is making sure that this is part of a larger conversation that is taking place at lots of intersections for new and existing CSEs. So I think we would love to figure out a way to make this more integrated in the recruitment process, talking about mental health, both with new CSEs, but also with the boards that are looking to hire those CSEs, that this is more of a conversation that we have at annual, that it is more prominent, that it is more of an educational tool that's built into the materials we provide to our boards to know how to be better boards, and that it's pieces and parts of the material that future CSEs are looking at when they do things like professional development and exploring their CAE. I think we have a full recognition of the fact that this is not a short-term fix. It's a long-term cultural shift. And we can't do that just with another survey or another webinar. I think it has to be multifaceted in all the places that CSEs interact, converse, converge, collaborate, all of those things. And it's got to be present. And it's got to be pieces of what that looks like.
I don't think we want to be known as the people who did this survey. What we really want to do is change the industry and have everybody own the importance of the mental and physical health of not just CSEs, but all staff, and to change the profession. So somebody else wants to talk about it. If somebody else wants to continue on asking the questions, that's great. I think we're going to continue to beat that drum and in our places of influence, try and continue to have this conversation. But more, it's about how do we make this pervasive conversation across the industry.
I just wanted to add an irony moment, Lindsay, of what you just said. We had emailed each other that ASAE is holding an executive leadership retreat. And interestingly enough, the stated subject is wellness, and the speakers are kind of formulated around wellness. The ironic part for me is that you have to travel to, I think it was Montreal, and pay a fairly hefty price for registration, which, to take nothing away from the excellence that I'm sure ASA is going to produce, and I mean that entirely, it's not as available to everyone right now. And so while I appreciate that they are having this ELC that has a wellness sort of focus, it's not as widely accessible to the many small staff associations or state level associations or AMCs or anyone who might be able to attend. And so, Lindsay, I laughed a little bit when you said it. We don't want to be known as the people who did the survey. Yes, like how great would it be if this was embraced by more people who never has to say our name or who started the conversation. None of us, I've learned graciously, have any care that we are sort of like behind this. It's more about the greater good, and how that conversation can reach a more broad audience would be, I think, the ultimate goal.
Wow, this has been a very meaningful conversation. Thank you, Lindsay, Adam, and Tara. I hope that we can continue the conversation. I want to thank you for all your time today. For people who are interested in the results of the survey, how do they find it?
The best way to see sort of the broad scope of the survey would be through Associations Now, or the article on ASAE's website, which is titled Sustaining Mental and Physical Health as a CSE. It was published January 13th and is available to read for free and does include some of those statistics that we talked about today. I would assume that if people want more information from the survey, any of us would be willing to discuss it further.
We'll put a link in the show notes to the Associations Now article, and I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profiles. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joanna.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. My personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!